Steam curled from the giant industrial pots as Margie Bloom stirred a vat of beef stew, her apron already stained and her hair tied back with a rubber band she'd found on the floor that morning. The kitchen of St. Elara's Academy was dimly lit, the flickering overheads casting long shadows across the tiled floor. It was nearly midnight, and the school had long since fallen silent. Only the hum of the walk-in freezer and the occasional pop of old plumbing kept her company. Her first day had been long, kids with allergy lists a mile long, teachers who barely said thank you, and a head cook who disappeared after lunch. So now, Margie found herself elbow-deep in prep for tomorrow's meals, humming softly to keep the ghosts of loneliness at bay. Then she felt it. A stillness. The kind that made the air thicken and the hairs on her arms stand up. Like someone had drawn a curtain over the world and was peering in through the sliver. She turned, wooden spoon clutched like a weapon. He stood at the edge of the kitchen, half shrouded in the shadow cast by the swinging door. Tall. Pale. Dressed in a black wool coat that didn't suit the season. His hair was dark and swept back, and his eyes, God, his eyes, gleamed like polished garnet under the fluorescence. "You're not supposed to be here," Margie said, voice steady though her pulse wasn't. He didn't move. Didn't blink. "Neither are you, technically. The kitchen closes at 10. "Well, someone's got to feed the rich brats and faculty who act like their mouths were carved by angels," she replied, wiping her hands on her apron. A faint smile tugged at the corner of his lips, like he wasn't used to being spoken to like that, and maybe liked it. "Vladek Moreau," he said, stepping fully into the light. "I fund the school." Margie tilted her head. "Right. The elusive Mr. Moreau. Thought you were just a ghost with a checkbook." His smile didn't deepen, but his eyes softened. "And you are?" "Margie Bloom. Lunchlady." Something flickered behind his expression at her name. A recognition, maybe. Or confusion. But it was gone before she could name it. "Strange," he murmured, taking in the scent of the air. "It smells like rosemary. And something else." "Beef stew." "No," he said quietly. "Something older." Margie stepped back, unsettled now. "Well, if you're hungry, I've got extra." "I don't eat stew." The way he said it, flat, final, not even remotely apologetic, sent a ripple down her spine. Vladek stepped closer, and for a moment, the hum of the freezer died, the lights dimmed, and Margie felt like she was standing on the edge of something vast and bottomless. Then just as suddenly, it all snapped back to normal. "I should let you get back to it," he said. "Good night, Margie." He turned and disappeared through the door, leaving behind the lingering scent of earth after rain, and something metallic, sharp. Margie stared at the spot where he'd stood, her heart racing. She didn't know why, but something about that man made her feel like she'd met him before. In a dream. In a nightmare. Or in a life that wasn't hers. Chapter 2, The Taste of Memory. The morning at St. Elara's Academy began like any other, gray skies, lukewarm coffee, and the clatter of breakfast trays. Margie moved through the cafeteria like a ghost in a maze, her hands busy but her thoughts snagged on the man from the night before. Vladek Moreau. His name lingered like an aftertaste. Every time she blinked, she saw those eyes, deep garnet and ancient, like they had watched centuries rot and wither. She was spooning oatmeal into rows of bowls when the scream came. It cut through the morning buzz like a scalpel. Students jumped in their seats, some dropping their trays, others just staring toward the hallway with wide eyes. Then chaos. A girl, pale, trembling, was carried in by two students. Her eyes were rolled back, and she kept mumbling something unintelligible. Margie rushed from behind the counter, her apron flapping like a cape. "She just collapsed," one of the boys stammered. She was saying something about eyes. Red eyes. Margie knelt beside her, brushing sweat-drenched hair from the girl's forehead. "It's okay, sweetheart. You're safe now." The girl's lips moved again. Barely a whisper. Shadow. With red eyes. Watching. Margie's blood turned cold. The school nurse finally arrived, taking the girl away, and the crowd dispersed with a kind of morbid curiosity only teenagers could muster. Margie returned to the kitchen, her pulse still pounding. Later that day, as she restocked the dry pantry, she noticed something odd. One of the flour sacks had been shoved aside, revealing the wall behind it. At first, she thought it was just grime. But when she leaned in closer, she saw it, a symbol carved into the plaster. A crude circle of thorns enclosing a teardrop, and at its center, a small, upside-down cross. The carving pulsed with a strange energy, like it had just been made. Margie reached out and traced it with her fingers. Her skin tingled on contact, sharp and cold, like frostbite. "What are you doing?" a voice said behind her. She spun around. Vladek. He stood in the doorway, his presence swallowing the room whole. He looked at the carving and stilled. "Where did you find that?" His voice was low, tight. "It was just here. Behind the flower." "What is it?" He walked past her, gloved fingers brushing the symbol but never touching it. His face went paler, if that were possible. "It's called a mourning seal," he said. "It's used to mark territory. Of something that shouldn't exist anymore." Margie crossed her arms. "You keep saying creepy things without ever explaining what they mean. Maybe try honesty for once." He looked at her for a long moment, like he was deciding whether she could handle the truth, or if telling it would unravel everything. "It belongs to a sect long buried," he said finally. "If it's here, someone's digging them back up." Before she could ask more, he turned to go. "Wait," she called. "What do they want?" He paused at the door, and without turning, answered, "Blood. And memory." And then he was gone. Margie stood alone in the pantry, surrounded by sacks of sugar and flour, staring at a symbol that felt older than language, and somehow, eerily familiar. Chapter 3, of Garlic and Ghosts. The sky over St. Helara's hung low and gray, a blanket of clouds pressing against the old stone towers like an omen. Rain whispered against the windows as Margie scrubbed down the lunch tables in silence, her movements automatic, her mind not on the smell of bleach or the ache in her knees, but on the words Vladek had left behind. Blood. And memory. The phrase echoed through her bones, unsettling in a way she couldn't explain. Ever since she'd touched that strange symbol in the pantry, her dreams had turned strange, flashes of fire and screaming, of hands gripping hers in the dark, of whispers in a language she didn't know but understood. By the time the school emptied for the night, Margie had made a decision. She wasn't going to be another passive bystander in some creeping nightmare. Not in her kitchen. She waited until the halls were quiet, the only sound the click of her sensible shoes on the cold tile. The staff wing was near empty at night, but she knew exactly which office to find. She knocked. No answer. She knocked again. Harder. Finally, the door creaked open. And there he was. Vladek Moreau, shirt unbuttoned at the collar, sleeves rolled back, candlelight from a single lamp casting long shadows across his face. He looked up from an old leather-bound book and studied her as if she were a puzzle he hadn't solved yet. "I didn't expect you so soon," he said. Margie stepped in without being invited. "You're going to tell me what's going on?" Vladek raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. "There are symbols showing up in my pantry. A student passed out talking about red eyes. I don't care what kind of monster you think you're hiding from, I need to know if these kids are in danger." He shut the book with a soft thud. "Everyone here is in danger," he said, matter-of-factly. "Including you." She didn't flinch. "Then tell me why." He stood, his presence sudden and overwhelming, like a shadow taller than it should be. "Because St. Helara sits on cursed ground. Because monsters are real. And because you, Margie Bloom, are glowing like a match in the middle of a forest fire." She stared at him. "What are you talking about?" He stepped closer, and for the first time, Margie noticed the hunger in his gaze. Not for food. For truth. For something he'd lost. "You smell like something I haven't known in 100 years, he said, voice hushed, reverent. "And that symbol, it wasn't carved to scare you. It was carved to warn others." Her throat tightened. "Warn them about what?" "You," he said. That night, as Margie returned to her modest quarters, she found something waiting for her. She wiped the steamed mirror in her bathroom, and there, written in the condensation, were 3 chilling words. "He's watching you." Her breath caught. The air turned ice cold. And behind her, in the mirror's reflection, stood the shadow of a man who shouldn't be there at all. Chapter 4, Thorns in the Garden. Margie couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. It was in the rustle of leaves outside her window, in the way the hall lights flickered as she passed, in the silence between footsteps. The mirror message haunted her, but when she turned to look, there'd been nothing. No man. No shadow. Just the ghost of her own fear reflected back at her. Days passed with tight nerves and sleepless nights. She stayed late in the kitchen, partly for the overtime, mostly for the safety of movement, of doing. Vladek hadn't shown himself again, and part of her was relieved. The other part kept hoping he would. It was during one of those late shifts, while searching the pantry for more cloves, that she noticed something strange about the walk-in freezer. A draft. Cold air was expected, yes, but this was different. The chill had a current, like a breath exhaling from within the walls. Curious, she stepped inside, brushing past crates of frozen vegetables and bricks of vacuum-packed beef. In the far corner, behind a stack of boxes, a wall panel looked slightly off, like the seal had been broken. Margie pushed. It gave with a sigh of old hinges, revealing a narrow, cobweb-covered corridor leading into pitch black. Her breath clouded in the air. Logic told her to leave it be. But something deeper, older, moved her feet forward. She took a flashlight from the shelf, clicked it on, and stepped through. The corridor led into a hidden chamber, stone walls, damp with time, and a floor littered with dry rose petals, long dead. On the far wall hung a series of paintings, draped in dust-covered cloth. Margie hesitated, then pulled the nearest one down. She stumbled back. The face in the painting looked exactly like hers. Softer maybe. Younger. Dressed in 19th-century garb with a high collar and lace cuffs. But those eyes, her eyes, were unmistakable. Beneath the portrait, a tarnished brass plaque read: Marguerite B. Moreau, 1863. Beloved, betrayed, burned. Her heart pounded. Moreau? She moved to the next portrait. This one was Vladek, less pale, eyes less wary, but clearly him. The painting beside it showed the two of them together, her arm linked with his, standing in a rose garden at twilight. Margie's hand trembled as she reached for the last cloth. Beneath it, a canvas soaked in ash and paint displayed a burning stake, and at its center, herself, bound, screaming, flames licking her feet. She stumbled backward, breath ragged. This wasn't just a hidden room. It was a tomb of memory. A shrine to a life she didn't remember, but somehow knew. On the stone wall behind her, etched in the mortar, were the words: Love cannot die. It only waits. She fled the chamber, heart racing, freezer door slamming shut behind her. Outside, the roses in the courtyard had bloomed, despite the cold, and each thorn stem dripped with something that wasn't due. Chapter 5, Beneath His Fangs, a Heart. The sky cracked open that evening, thunder rolling over St. Helars like a beast stirring in its sleep. Rain swept across the grounds in sweeping sheets, blurring the line between earth and sky. Most of the students had gone home for the weekend, and the academy sat quieter than usual, eerily so. Margie wiped down the prep counters in a daze, her hands moving by habit. The hidden room, the paintings, the name Moreau, they churned in her mind like a storm all their own. The woman in those portraits. Marguerite. She wasn't just a coincidence. She was a warning. She felt it in her bones. The power went out just after 9. The lights flickered once. Then darkness fell. The emergency backup failed to kick in. And then came the footsteps. Not hurried. Not human. Steady, deliberate, like someone walking with no reason to hide. Margie stepped into the hall, flashlight in hand. The beam wobbled slightly as she scanned the corridor. Water dripped somewhere in the distance. The air felt heavy, damp, and wrong. Then she saw him. A tall figure in a dark hooded cloak, standing at the far end of the hallway. Motionless. Watching. Hey. Margie called out. You're not supposed to be here. The figure didn't move. She took a step forward, grip tightening on the flashlight. That was when he lunged. Fast, inhumanly fast. Margie barely had time to duck as a blade glinted in the light, swiping past her face. She fell hard against the wall, the flashlight spinning away. The figure advanced. A hiss of steel and shadow. Then, a blur. Something collided with the attacker, sending them crashing into a row of lockers with bone-rattling force. Margie gasped as she looked up. Vladek. He stood between her and the intruder, fangs bared, eyes glowing like fire behind frost. His coat flared with the wind as if the darkness itself were stitched into the seams. The hooded figure staggered to their feet and fled down the hall, vanishing into the dark like smoke into air. Vladek turned to Margie, chest heaving, eyes wild. You shouldn't have stayed tonight, he growled. She stared at him, still catching her breath. You. You saved me. His face softened, just slightly. I had no choice. Yes, you did, she whispered. You always have a choice. He took a step closer. His fangs were gone now, his features calming, as if she were pulling him back from some brink. You're not afraid, he said. I should be, she replied. But I'm not. He looked at her like she was a relic he never thought he'd see again. Something beautiful, impossible. Why? He asked. Margie looked at him, truly looked, and something inside her stirred. A prayer half forgotten. A name caught in the throat of memory. I don't know, she said softly. But I feel like I've seen you before. A long time ago. Maybe in a dream. Vladek's voice dropped to a whisper. Not a dream. A life. Then he did something he hadn't done in over a century. He reached for her hand. And Margie, without knowing why, whispered a prayer in a language she didn't recognize but felt like home. Words that made Vladek freeze. He looked at her, stunned. That prayer, he said. Where did you learn it? She shook her head slowly. I didn't. Outside, the rain slowed. The storm passed. But inside Vladek Moreau, something dangerous and tender had begun to stir, something that could change everything. Chapter 6, The Order of Saint Elara. The next morning came pale and still, as if the storm had taken the world's breath with it. Margie moved through the cafeteria with a quiet focus, slicing apples and watching her thoughts spiral with every careful cut. Her hand ached from where she'd fallen, her body sore, but she said nothing. What mattered wasn't the bruises, it was the way Vladek had looked at her. The way that ancient fear flickered behind his eyes when she spoke that strange prayer. He knew more than he was saying. And now, so did she. The figure who attacked her hadn't been random. Someone had wanted her gone. Or silenced. Later that afternoon, as students trickled out and the sky darkened early with low, bruised clouds, Margie made her way to the library. Not the regular one, the restricted archives. The part of the school no one ever mentioned aloud but everyone seemed to avoid. The key was in the head custodian's forgotten drawer, wrapped in twine and paper marked "Do Not Touch." She touched it anyway. Inside, the air was cold and heavy with the scent of dust and old secrets. Rows of tall, iron shelves stood like silent sentinels. She wandered until she found a section of worn, leather-spined tomes labeled Local Histories, St. Elara's Founding. It didn't take long. A slim, crimson-bound journal caught her eye, its cover engraved with a symbol she now recognized, the circle of thorns enclosing an upside-down cross. The Morning Seal. She flipped it open. The writing inside was small, cramped, and furious. Notes about a secret faction buried within the academy since the 1800s. A group calling themselves the Order of Saint Elara. Formed to eradicate the cursed bloodlines that once ruled the land. Their motto was etched into the final page. By blade and by binding, let no darkness bloom. Margie's stomach twisted. The order still existed. And if the attacker from last night had been one of them? A creak echoed behind her. She turned. A man stood at the end of the aisle. Early 40s. Clean-shaven. Wire-rimmed glasses that glinted beneath the yellowed ceiling lights. Mrs. Bloom, he said, voice warm, too warm. Doing a bit of late reading? She closed the journal slowly. Just brushing up on local history. He stepped closer, casual. You've found quite the relic, haven't you? Margie's instincts screamed. Who are you? She asked. He smiled, too wide. Let's just say. I work in school preservation. Then he turned and walked away, vanishing between the rows. She returned the journal and locked the archives behind her, pulse racing. That night, as she passed by the staff lounge, she heard hushed voices inside. She paused, just outside the cracked door. She's awakening, a man whispered. The blood calls to her. If we wait too long, he'll protect her. Another voice replied, sharper, female. Then we won't wait. Margie backed away, unseen. The order wasn't a legend. Chapter 7, A Kiss for the Damned. The days at St. Elara's moved strangely after that, too fast in the daylight, too slow in the dark. Margie felt eyes on her everywhere. Teachers smiled too tightly. Students whispered and fell silent when she walked by. Even the shadows in the cafeteria stretched wrong, like they leaned toward her, not away. She slept little. Ate even less. But Vladek came every night now. He never knocked, never used doors. He simply appeared, by the pantry, in the courtyard, once even outside her window in the rain. He spoke softly, stayed for minutes or hours. Sometimes he watched her work in silence. Other times, he told her stories, half-truths wrapped in ancient metaphors. Legends about cursed kings and dying stars. She listened anyway. There was comfort in his presence. Dangerous comfort. Tonight, she found him sitting alone in the greenhouse, surrounded by night-blooming roses that had no business surviving this late in the season. Their petals were the color of dried blood. "You always did love red things," he murmured as she stepped in. "Did I?" she asked, folding her arms. He glanced at her, eyes glowing faintly. "Once." They said nothing for a moment. The air was thick with unspoken memories. Ones that didn't belong to her, but lived inside her anyway. "Why are you protecting me?" she asked. "Because I owe you," he replied. "For what?" Vladek stood, walking toward her slowly. "For everything." Margie didn't move. Not when he reached out. Not when his cold fingers brushed a lock of hair from her cheek. Not even when his gaze dropped to her lips. He leaned closer, and his voice dropped to a whisper. "They'll come for you soon." The order. "They've seen enough." Felt the shift. "I can take care of myself," she whispered. "No. You can't." And then he kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It was fierce and full of ache, like he'd waited lifetimes to taste her again. His lips were cold, but the fire it sparked beneath her skin nearly brought her to her knees. She kissed him back. And then. Pain. A sudden jolt like lightning tore through his chest. Vladek ripped himself away, gasping, falling to one knee. Smoke hissed from where his skin had touched hers, his lower lip blistering, his fingertips seared. "Don't move," Margie cried, kneeling beside him. But he looked at her with stunned horror. "Your touch. It burns." They stared at one another, both shaken. Margie reached for him again, but hesitated. "What's happening to me?" she asked. Vladek's voice trembled, not from fear, but reverence. "You're not becoming something," he said. "You're remembering what you already are." She looked down at her hands. And for the first time, she noticed the faint glow pulsing beneath her skin, golden, flickering, alive. Not human. Not anymore. Or maybe. Not ever. Chapter 8, The Apron's Curse. The wind howled outside St. Hilary's as if mourning something lost to time. Inside the academy, the halls felt heavier, older, like the building itself had begun to remember along with her. Margie hadn't told anyone about the kiss. About the searing pain. About the way her hands glowed faintly now when she touched water or when she whispered that strange prayer in her sleep. She barely understood it herself. But something inside her had cracked open. And the memories were beginning to bleed through. It started with a dream, more vivid than anything she'd ever experienced. She stood barefoot in a garden under a blood-red moon. Her dress was soaked with tears. A man, Vladek, younger, softer, knelt before her, hands stained with blood. Around them, villagers screamed. Torches burned. A bell tolled, slow and final. "Marguerite," he had said, his voice broken. "You must run." She didn't. She stayed. And she died. Margie woke gasping in her bed, the sheets twisted around her, her skin fever warm. That morning, she returned to the secret chamber behind the freezer, the one with the paintings. Dust still clung to the frames. The air still held the scent of withered roses and cold stone. She stood before the portrait of Margie Moreau, tracing her own features in oil and canvas. "This was me," she whispered. A voice behind her answered. Yes. And no. She turned. Vladek stood at the threshold. He didn't enter. He never did. Not this room. "I buried you here," he said quietly. "After they took you. After they burned you." Margie blinked. Why would they do that? He walked to the edge of the frame, his hand hovering near the image of them together. "Because you were a healer. A miracle," they said. "You could draw out sickness with your hands. Mend bone with breath." They feared what they didn't understand. Margie looked down at her apron, still dusted in flour, still tied in a neat little bow. "I'm just a lunchlady," she murmured. "No," he said. "You're a soul that refuses to rest." Vladek turned to her, his voice thick with something she'd never heard from him before, grief. "They called it witchcraft. They tore you from me. The order was born from that fire. You were their first victim. And their greatest fear. Margie swayed, breath shallow. Images flickered behind her eyes, ropes, flames, a crowd's cruel chant, and above it all, his voice, screaming her name. I remember the smoke, she whispered. The way it tasted. Vladek nodded once. I tried to save you, he said. But they cursed my blood. I wasn't fast enough. I wasn't strong enough. Margie's eyes stung. Why now? She asked. Why am I remembering now? Because your soul found its way back to this place. And because your curse never left. He reached into his coat and pulled out something wrapped in velvet. Gently, he unrolled it to reveal a strip of blackened cloth, tattered, scorched. Her old apron. Margie touched it. And the world shattered. She was no longer in the chamber. She was in fire. In pain. In love. In death. And above it all, she heard her own voice chanting the same prayer she'd spoken in the kitchen days ago, calling out not to gods, but to him. Then silence. Back in the present, she crumpled to her knees, shaking. Vladek bent down, reaching out, but not touching her. You weren't just a healer, he said. You were the key to ending them. You are. Margie looked up, her voice raw. I don't want this. His eyes darkened. Neither did I. The old apron lay between them on the cold stone floor. Still carrying the scent of ash. Still cursed. Still waiting. Chapter 9, Bloodlines and Boiling Water. Margie didn't speak to Vladek for 2 days. She couldn't. Not after what she'd seen, what she'd felt, a past life consumed in flame, a love ripped from the world, a name that now tasted like ash on her tongue. Marguerite. She tried to lose herself in the ordinary again. Chopping vegetables. Scrubbing pans. Folding napkins with trembling hands. But everything ordinary had grown warped. Because now, when she brushed against someone in the hall, she saw things, memories that didn't belong to her. She knew what was in the nurse's locked drawer before she opened it. Knew when a student would get 6 seconds before they did. Something inside her had cracked for good. And worse, it was spreading. It happened during lunch prep on Wednesday. The water in the kitchen's industrial kettle boiled over suddenly, hissing and roiling like it was possessed. Margie wasn't even near the controls. It should have shut off automatically, but it didn't. She reached for the knob instinctively, and the moment her fingers brushed the metal, a violent vision overtook her. A grand chamber, lit by candelabras. Velvet and bone. Rows of vampires with silver goblets, blood gleaming like wine. She stood at the center, arms bound, a crown of thorns pressed into her scalp. And then, Vladek, held down, screaming her name as a blade was raised above her heart. She ripped her hand back with a cry, falling to the floor. A nearby student ran to her side. Miss Bloom, are you okay? She nodded weakly, waving them off. Just slipped. I'm fine. But she wasn't. Later that night, Vladek came for her. Not in the shadows. Not in secrecy. He stood in the open doorway of the kitchen like he belonged there. I felt it, he said. Whatever you saw. Margie didn't look at him. I can't take much more of this. You were born to. I was born to cook and keep my head down, she snapped. No, he said gently. You were born again because your soul refused to let them win. She looked up at him now, her hands trembling. I saw them. The vampires. I was going to die. You couldn't stop them. He nodded solemnly. That night, I was betrayed. Bound by silver. Forced to watch. Margie wiped her hands on her apron and leaned back against the counter. So what now? More memories? More visions? No, he said. Answers. He led her to his manor, something she never thought he'd do. It stood at the edge of the forest, ivy-wrapped and crooked like a forgotten cathedral. Inside, it was full of silence and candlelight, a library of books that smelled like leather and secrets. But it was the cellar that held the truth. Dust coated every surface. Shelves of vials and scrolls lined the walls. And in the center was an old cot, and a man. Or, what was left of one. The figure stirred at their presence, eyelids fluttering open. His skin was thin as parchment, eyes cloudy but searching. And when he saw Margie, he gasped. Mistress. Margie froze. Do I know you? The man tried to sit up. You called me back. After all this time. Vladek stepped forward. His name is Elias. He served you once, faithfully. Margie knelt beside the man, heart pounding. How am I here? What am I? Elias reached out, his voice barely a breath. You are the last of the blood. The root of the old tree. The fire they feared. The soul that cannot die. Margie's vision swam. Why me? His lips cracked into a smile. Because they burned you once. And you rose. Outside, the wind began to howl. And somewhere deep within the academy, something ancient and watching began to stir. Chapter 10, The Bite That Wasn't. Margie didn't remember walking back to the academy that night. The world outside Vladek's manor felt dim, like a dream she couldn't fully wake from. Elias's voice still echoed in her head, the soul that cannot die. The words weren't comforting, they were a sentence. A confirmation that nothing would ever be normal again. She barely slept. And when she did, her dreams were worse. A forest soaked in moonlight. The sound of something being hunted. And then, herself, standing barefoot in a clearing, wearing a white gown stained with blood. Vladek approached her, eyes black with hunger. He reached for her throat, not to hurt her, but to save her. Let me turn you, he whispered. Before they take you from me again. She always woke up just before his fangs touched skin. By the time the weekend came, the academy felt tighter. The order was quiet, but not gone. Their presence was like the smell of smoke in a house with no fire. The students sensed it too. The ones with old bloodlines, witch-born, fate-touched, psychic-drenched, they'd begun to avoid Margie in the halls. As if something in her radiated too brightly now. Or too darkly. That Sunday night, the sky split with lightning, and Margie found herself pacing in the kitchen, candles burning low. Vladek arrived just after midnight, silent as ever, his face etched with something he rarely let show, desperation. They're planning something, he said, closing the door behind him. I can feel it. The order is preparing to strike. Margie folded her arms. Then let them come. He stepped forward. No. You don't understand. They want to use your blood. Not kill you, not yet. If they perform the rite of reversal during the eclipse, they can bind your soul. Strip it of memory. Bury it for another 100 years. Her stomach turned. So what do we do? His eyes locked onto hers. I turn you. The silence after those words was complete. No, she said. It's the only way. No. Her voice cracked now. I'm not becoming one of them. I won't feed, Vladek. I won't live forever and watch this happen again and again. You'd live, he whispered. With me. You'd be safe. I'm not afraid of dying, she said. He took a step closer. But I am. Without waiting for her answer, Vladek reached out, cupping her face. His hands were cold, reverent. I'll be gentle, he promised. And then he kissed her, softly this time. Not with the hunger of a curse, but the ache of a man who'd waited too long. His lips trailed to her neck. She didn't pull away. And just as his fangs grazed her skin, her body convulsed. Light burst from her in a sudden pulse, hurling Vladek across the kitchen. He crashed into the counter with a grunt, his coat smoking, the air sharp with the scent of scorched magic. Margie gasped, clutching her chest. Vladek rose slowly, stunned. Your blood, he said hoarsely, it refused me. She backed away. I didn't do anything. No, he said. Something ancient is guarding you. Your soul can't be turned. Not by me. Not by anyone. They stared at each other, both shaken by what almost happened, and what didn't. Something inside her had chosen. And whatever it wasn't done yet. Chapter 11, Stew for the Dead. By Monday morning, word had spread like wildfire, though no one could say how it started. Whispers swirled through the stone halls of St. Hilary's, too quiet to be traced, but loud enough to alter the air. They said the Bloom woman had healed someone. With her hands. That she didn't pray to God, but to something older. That a dead boy in the infirmary, really, truly dead, had opened his eyes just as she passed by, her apron soaked in broth and something glowing. Margie tried to ignore it. She had work to do. The ovens needed cleaning. Potatoes needed peeling. She could almost pretend she was normal again, if not for the way the students stared at her like she was a walking miracle. Or a warning. It had happened 2 nights ago. A boy, Jamie Hill, quiet, small, one of the few students who ever thanked her, collapsed in the hall. No breath. No pulse. Gone before help could arrive. Margie found herself kneeling beside him, instinct moving faster than logic. She placed her hands on his chest. Then she whispered. Not a prayer. A command. Not in English. Not even in Latin. The words had spilled from her like breath itself. The air had gone still. Time, too. And then Jamie gasped, eyes snapping open, chest heaving, life crashing back into him like a tidal wave. Now, he sat in the nurse's office, dazed but healthy. No one could explain it. And Margie? She was starting to understand that she'd never been meant to. That afternoon, Vladek appeared in the courtyard as she passed through the garden. He looked tired, not weak, but worn down, like he'd been holding a war inside his chest and the armor had begun to crack. You raised him, he said, skipping pleasantries. I didn't mean to, she replied. You didn't mean not to. She looked at him. So what am I now? Some kind of resurrector? He stepped closer. You are what the Order has feared since the beginning. The fire they can't put out. You can bring back what they've tried for centuries to silence. Then why do I feel like something's wrong? Vladek hesitated. Because death has rules, he said. And you just broke one. Later that night, the boy, Jamie, was found standing outside the school gates, barefoot, whispering to someone who wasn't there. When a teacher tried to guide him back inside, he turned, smiled wide, and said, She's opening the door. The one under the blood. We're all going to hear the bells again. Margie watched from the window above, chills rolling down her arms. Because she'd heard those bells before. In dreams. In fire. In the final moments of a lifelong past. And this time, they were tolling for the living. Chapter 12, The Coffin in the Cellar. A storm rolled in that evening, heavy and strange. Thunder didn't crack, it groaned, like the sky itself was warning them. Margie felt it deep in her bones as she walked the quiet halls of St. Hilary's. Doors creaked open by themselves. Light bulbs flickered even when the power was steady. And always, that feeling. Something underneath. It was Elias who led her there. The withered servant who'd once called her mistress. He appeared at the kitchen's back door like a memory taking shape, his eyes cloudy, hands shaking as he beckoned without a word. She followed. Through forgotten stairwells and beneath trapdoors she never knew existed, into a part of the academy no blueprint mentioned. The cellar wasn't a cellar. It was a crypt. The walls were carved with symbols older than language, thorn circles, crescent moons bleeding into eyes, a serpent swallowing its own tail. The torches lit themselves as they passed. Elias moved slowly, like the weight of time was dragging at his every step. Then they reached it. A stone slab, sealed with iron and wax, at the center of the floor. Carved into its lid, the symbol of her family crest, one she'd never seen before but knew instinctively. A sun behind a locked door. It called to me, Elias whispered. When you woke. Margie stepped forward, hands trembling. What is it? He didn't answer. She knelt, brushing dust and ash from the lid. The wax had cracked in places. The seal was breaking on its own. The air around it pulsed, slow and rhythmic. Like a heartbeat. She looked at Elias. Help me open it. Together, they slid the slab aside. Inside was a coffin, ancient and black as charred bone. Its surface shimmered faintly with a strange sheen, blood magic, old and protective. And carved into its face, in runes she didn't need to read to understand. She must not rise unless the world forgets her name. Margie reached out, hesitated. Then lifted the lid. Inside lay a body. A woman. Wearing her apron. Same body. Same salt and pepper curls. Same jawline. Only lifeless. Preserved as though she'd been placed there yesterday. Her hands were clasped over her chest, and in them, she held a folded scrap of parchment sealed with the crest from the hidden paintings. Margie's breath hitched. That's not me, she whispered. But it was. A version. A duplicate. A fragment of her that had died and been buried beneath the school. A failsafe. Elias knelt. This is what they tried to keep hidden. If they kill you now, they can replace you with this. Use your shell. Find your soul. Turn you into their weapon. Margie's voice broke. How do you know? Because they did it once before, he said. They failed. But they learned. She stood, backing away from the coffin, bile rising in her throat. They have a body. A backup. In case I resist. Vladek's voice cut through the dark. They never intended to kill you, he said from the shadows. Only hollow you out. And put something else inside. Margie turned to him, her voice a whisper. How do we stop them? Vladek's gaze fell to the coffin. We don't bury the past this time, he said. We burn it. Above them, in the world of the living, a bell began to toll. Once. Twice. Then again. And beneath the school, the body in the coffin exhaled. Chapter 13, The Widow's Prophecy. The wind had changed. It wasn't the kind that stirred trees or scattered leaves, it was the kind that moved inside people. That made candles flicker without flame and doors creak in apology. St. Helara's was no longer just a school, it had become a waiting room for something ancient. Margie barely slept now. Her reflection twitched when she didn't. Sometimes, her eyes glowed gold in the mirror. Sometimes, they didn't reflect at all. The sealed parchment from the coffin sat unopened on her nightstand, too heavy with meaning to touch again. Her apron still smelled faintly of rosemary, but now, she couldn't tell if it was real or memory clinging to fabric. The knock came just after dusk. 3 soft taps. She opened the door to find an old woman wrapped in a shawl of pale blue, her face mapped with time, her eyes cloudy but burning with uncanny purpose. You're later than I hoped, the woman said. But right on time, all the same. Who are you? Margie asked, voice sharp with exhaustion. The woman didn't answer. She stepped inside like she belonged, scanning the room before settling onto the edge of Margie's cot. I am the last living member of the Circle of Lightkeepers, she said at last. And I've come to tell you what the dead cannot. Margie stood frozen, one hand still on the doorknob. What do you mean? The woman pulled a tiny, leather-bound book from her bag and set it between them. Its cover was singed. On the first page, scrawled in hurried ink. To the one they cannot kill. You are the vessel, the woman said. A soul born not from womb, but from fire. Each time they kill you, you return. Stronger. Stranger. Closer to your final shape. Margie sat slowly. What final shape? The woman's eyes met hers. That is the choice. She opened the book. Inside were drawings, charcoal illustrations of Margie through the centuries. Burned at the stake. Drowned. Bound in silver. Faces the same. Hair different. Hands always glowing. You have 2 paths, Marguerite, the woman whispered. 1, you embrace what you are and rise as their queen, immortal, revered, untouchable. The order will kneel. Vampires will serve. Vladek will live. Margie's throat tightened. And the other? The woman closed the book with a sad smile. You burn them all. You end every cursed bloodline, every secret, every monster. Including him. Silence fell between them. The wind outside howled like a grieving widow. I can't make that choice, Margie said, her voice barely audible. You will, the woman replied. Before the moon turns red. She stood, shuffling toward the door. Wait, Margie said. Why are you helping me? The woman turned, her gaze soft now. Because I watched them take you from me once, a long time ago. I was your sister then. I couldn't stop them. Margie stared, words caught in her throat. I'm not strong enough, she whispered. You're not meant to be, the woman said, vanishing into the night. You're meant to become. And in her absence, the shadows of the room curled tighter, listening. Waiting. Counting down to the red moon's rise. Chapter 14, Till Death Do Us Thirst. The moon rose bloated and coppery, swollen with promise and warning. Every heartbeat at St. Helara's felt like a drum in a war march. The order was silent, but their silence was thunder. Margie stood before her mirror in the staff quarters, fingers trembling as she tied her apron. Not for cooking. For protection. The cloth was old, blessed, or cursed, depending on who was speaking. Her reflection blinked half a second too late. She didn't react anymore. Tonight wasn't ordinary. Tonight, Vladek Moreau was going to propose to her. He had asked her to meet him in the old chapel. A place abandoned by the academy decades ago, where stained glass windows showed angels that wept and saints with hollow eyes. She went, of course. She had to. Inside, he stood waiting, tall, still, eyes full of centuries. He had dressed like a man, not a monster. No long coat. No shadows clinging to his sleeves. Just him. Vulnerable. Beautiful. I didn't want to love you again, he said the moment she entered. But I did. And I do. Margie's throat tightened. Then why do I feel like this is goodbye? Vladek approached her slowly, and in his hands, he held a ring, ancient, gold, etched with her name in a language only their souls could remember. The stone shimmered blood-red under the dying candlelight. I have lived too long, he whispered. Seen too much. But I've never feared anything the way I fear losing you again. Marry me. Bind yourself to me. And I swear, I'll protect you from what comes next. Tears welled in her eyes. You said my soul can't be turned. No, he said. But it can choose. She stepped forward, took the ring, and slid it onto her finger. The candles flared. For a moment, it felt like peace. Then the doors of the chapel burst open. Guests flooded in, faculty, staff, students. All silent. Their eyes blank. Their footsteps synchronized. Margie turned, confusion tightening into dread. Then someone stepped forward, a woman in red. A teacher. Smiling far too widely. Forgive the interruption, she said sweetly. We just couldn't miss such a blessed occasion. Margie's skin crawled. The air had changed. Wine was passed around. Glasses lifted. A toast was made. To love that never dies, the red-clad woman purred. And blood that never lies. She sliced her palm and let 3 drops fall into her cup. Others followed. A line of blood. A binding. Margie froze. And then the smell hit her. Copper. Iron. Memory. The air pulsed. Her throat ached. Her teeth ached. She clutched the table. Her eyes burned gold. Her fingers trembled. And suddenly, she wasn't breathing. She was hungering. Vladek rushed to her side. Margie, don't. But it was too late. She lunged. Not at a person. Not to bite. But to drink, the blood in the toast. Something primal had broken loose, older than choice, deeper than fear. She stopped herself with a gasp, collapsing to the chapel floor, her hand clutching her chest where her heart once beat steady. Everyone stared. Not shocked. Expectant. Because that was the test. And she'd failed it. The woman in red leaned down, whispering just loud enough for Margie to hear. Welcome back, Your Majesty. And behind her, hidden beneath the crowd's shadowed hush, the bell began to toll. One more time. For the bride. For the beast. Chapter 15, The Crimson Reckoning. The red moon rose high over St. Hilary's, swollen with ancient hunger. It cast the school in a sickly glow, drenching every stone, every hallway, in the shade of blood. The bells tolled at midnight, not for prayer, but for prophecy. Margie stood alone at the center of the courtyard, her apron fluttering in the unnatural wind, her eyes glowing faint gold, her breath no longer steady. The ring Vladek had given her pulsed on her finger like it had a heartbeat of its own. She wasn't just Margie Bloom anymore. She wasn't even just Marguerite. She was something in between. Something becoming. The order circled the perimeter of the courtyard, silent, their faces hidden beneath ceremonial masks carved from bone and ash. At their center stood the woman in red, robes dragging behind her like dried blood, smile venomous and victorious. You drank, she said calmly. You chose. I was tricked, Margie spat, though even as she said it, she wasn't sure that was entirely true. The woman's smile didn't waver. Choice and fate are just 2 sides of the same blade, dear. You were always going to wake. A hiss of shadows rippled through the courtyard. Then Vladek appeared. Wounded. Barely standing. His coat was torn, blood darkening the fabric. A silver blade jutted from his side. Margie screamed, running toward him, but a wall of invisible force knocked her to her knees. Let him die, the woman in red purred. He's the last tether to the weakness you still cling to. Shed him, and ascend. Margie looked up, eyes brimming with fire and fury. No. The ground trembled beneath her. No, she repeated, rising. I am not yours. The wind howled. The bells stopped. Vladek, gasping, tried to speak. If you do this, you can't go back. Margie looked at him, truly looked, and something inside her broke wide open. She stepped forward, hand outstretched, and for a moment, time stopped. Visions poured through her mind, burnings, drownings, daggers, birth. Her soul had been reborn through centuries of pain. She had been loved and murdered, worshipped and erased. Now, the cycle had reached its end. She turned to the order. I won't be your queen. And then she spoke the final prayer, the one buried deepest in her soul. Not to ascend. Not to reign. But to end. Light exploded from her chest. Golden, blinding, pure. The force of it shattered the ground, tore through the courtyard like a cleansing fire. The order screamed. Masks cracked. Bones burned. The woman in red disintegrated mid-scream, her ashes curling into the wind like lost words. And Vladek. Vladek fell still. Margie ran to him, cradling him in her lap. His skin was cooling fast, breath shallow. "I told you I would protect you," he whispered. "You idiot," she sobbed, holding him tighter. "You were supposed to live." "I did," he said, smiling faintly. "With you." His eyes closed. The red moon began to fade. Margie sat there, motionless, in the ruins of the courtyard, surrounded by dust, silence, and the smell of fire. Alone. But something shimmered faintly on the wind, a whisper, a pulse. Not death. Not yet. And as the first light of dawn touched the stones of St. Hilary's, Margie stood. Changed. Unbound. And no longer afraid of what she was.